Hey everybody, I'm here to give my thoughts on Neuromancer by William Gibson. I just finished this last night, and if you've been following me, I often mention my kind of journey back to reading and the kind of struggles therein, clawing my brain back from this little device recording me now and the apps withheld within. And so it, has traditionally taken me quite a while to get through books, um, struggling to get through two or three a year. And so, you know, I decided to jump back into it, cut back on my social media time, things like that, trying to get away from the phone. And so, with the Apple TV show coming out, I thought now would be a good time to pick this up and give it a read. And managed to get through this in, for me, a very short turnaround time, about a month and a half-ish. And, it definitely, lives up to its reputation as kind of the, seminal originator of cyberpunk. Um, you know, it is, so many of the things that we kind of, take now as cliches of the genre. It clearly influenced so many things that came after it. The Matrix, obviously, the game Cyberpunk 2077 lifts very heavily from it. But, I was even surprised to see, things that were in here that, even got plucked out for things like Stranger Things. There's an element in there towards the end of the book that, like, when you read the passage about it, you're like, oh crap, like that's direct, they do, like that is in Stranger Things, so a hugely influential book. I also very surprised at how liberally Cyberpunk 2077 lifted from it. There's all sorts of stuff in there that's directly in there. Night City, the plot is very heavily lifted for Cyberpunk 2077. I try and do my reviews very spoiler free, but as you read through and things get revealed, you're going to see more and more. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, they may tweak the structure a little bit, but yeah, this is very heavily lifted. It's essentially, a heist book that is just taken and put into this at the time, 84-ish, I think. Really kind of new world. We follow, Case, who is this kind of burnt out hacker, and he gets brought into this big heist, and this kind of spirals out of control after there. And just one of the things that it does really well, especially as you get later into the book, is it really starts to ratchet up the tension around everything going on. And that's one of the things it does exceptionally well. Which is, why, especially once I got to kind of the midpoint of the book and started building towards the climax, it really just became easier and easier to just start churning through the pages. Now, this book isn't without its flaws. I think what's going to prevent a lot of people, from really diving into it is the structure of the book itself. And this is also my biggest curiosity with the TV show, because what tends to happen in the book is it will shift gears almost even mid-sentence, where, you're reading along and you're in this scenario, and then all of a sudden the next thing you know, you're in cyberspace. And there's no real transition there. You're literally finishing one paragraph and then immediately you're into the next thing. There's no break, there's no anything. And you're just completely like, wait, what? And it took a while for me to kind of get used to that. And, the first couple times that it happened, it took me a minute to really kind of figure out like kind of what was going on. And, once I kind of grasped that, oh, okay, this is this is just a weird structural thing that he's decided to do in this novel. Once I kind of grasped that that's what was going on, it made it easier to read, but I can definitely see where it would be off-putting for some, who maybe want a more linear, you know, straightforward story without having to try and keep track of all the switching back and forth going on. Because like I said, it does switch on a dime and then back again, and expects you to just kind of keep up, which makes it a very unique read. But also, like I said, I can see where people, coming to this, especially with the TV show coming out, I could see where they might be very, put off by it. So, I think it is definitely for sci-fi fans, and especially if you are fans of Cyberpunk, this is kind of a must-read, because it is so formative of that genre that you're kind of missing out if you haven't read it. I always knew about it, and I knew it was a classic, but for whatever reason, I just never got around to it. I knew the kind of, tropes and things that kind of came from it that have populated, cyberpunk, because I came to the cyberpunk genre through the old 80s role-playing, tabletop role-playing game. And that's how I came to cyberpunk as a genre. And obviously people point to like Blade Runner as kind of a precursor to that. The look, the vibe, the kind of grungy, almost dystopian, corporate, neo-noir setting of Blade Runner as also being kind of a precursor to that. And obviously the novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? But, this obviously is the blueprint of what we all know as cyberpunk. So, if you're a fan of the genre, you do, need to do yourself the favor of actually reading through it. Just understand that the structure's a little dicey, and it takes a bit to get used to the jumping around. But, one of the complaints that I will kind of push back on, though, is, a lot of people, I watched some reviews preparing to do my own, and some of the criticisms I saw was just kind of on the characters, and just kind of oh well, we don't really, they're not very deep or whatever, and and I think that to me is such an odd criticism, because to me, like, yeah, having a big in-depth, like immaculate character work, yeah, that's cool and all, but I kind of look at that the same way I look at like a good story in a video game. Like, I play the video game to to have fun playing the game. And if it happens to have this great in-depth, emotional, like, huge story with it, that's just epic and great and wonderful and engrossing, great. To me, that's an extra to the video game. When I read a book, I want, yes, decent characters, but I'm reading for the story. I'm reading for the, the story to pull me in, to engage me and have me, locked in, because I'm invested in where the story's going and what's going to happen next. And, I want the characters to, yes, have, some depth and some motivation, things like that. But I don't need it to be like this grandiose, treatise and character dynamics and, character depth and work and all this kind of stuff. I mean, Case is a perfectly fine kind of anti-hero. He's flawed, he's a drug user, he's a burnout, he's, not exactly the most heroic of people. He's got his own selfish motivations for doing this. You're dealing with, basically, kind of a group of thieves and murderers in a way, so, you're not really, dealing with, you know, the hero's journey, so to speak. But that said, you know, these are interesting characters, and you know, there's a lot going on there. And, you know, especially when you get into more of the reveals and things around Armitage, and, you know, those kind of things. And I think that there's, you know, and especially as the story goes and introduces some more kind of elements around AI and AI as a character, you know, I think you really kind of get an interesting, you know, sort of, you know, character group that is really entertaining and really interesting. And that's really more for me when I'm reading fiction. You know, is this, you know, is these characters that I'm spending all of this time with reading a book, you know, are they entertaining and engaging? And that's the part that matters the most to me. And I think that you know, Neuromancer delivers on that. I think that the characters, Case, Molly, Armitage, Wintermute, I think, you know, these characters are interesting, you know, and I think that they're engaging, and they keep you, you know, locked into this story that, like I said, the structure is kind of all over the place. And that, to me, speaks to the character work in this, in that the characters, you know, even though they aren't likable people, you know, they keep you locked in and they keep you engaged, and you want to know if they succeed or not. And, you know, I think that that's more of a testament to the quality of the character work in this. You know, not everything needs a huge in-depth backstory. Not every character you need to know their whole history. That's for the author to kind of know, to inform their personality throughout the book. We don't necessarily need to know that. It doesn't really add anything. It wouldn't add anything to the book for me to know Case's entire life story. That doesn't really do anything for me, and it wouldn't, to me, do anything for the book and the narrative. So, you know, overall, I would give this book a 4 out of 5. I think that, like I said, the structure is a little jarring, especially when you're not prepared for it. And I think that if anything is going to turn off anybody off the book, it's going to be that structure of jumping around and expecting you to just follow, instead of giving that sentence or two to kind of explain, like, oh, okay, we've transitioned into a new scene, a new environment, we're now over here. Instead, just jumping right into it. So I think if anything is going to turn anyone off, it's going to be that. But I mean, like I said, it's an absolute classic. It definitely, you know, like I said, 4 out of 5, you know, definitely worth your time, definitely worth picking up. You know, these days, most of my book purchases come from thrift stores. It's just a cheaper way for me to get more books, even though title-wise, it could be a little hit and miss. You know, I have good days, I have bad days, you know, when it comes to trying to pick up books from thrift stores. Especially since I tend to stick to horror, fantasy, sci-fi. Not that I don't pick up, you know, thrillers every once in a while, but that's mainly where I stick. And, you know, it's very hit and miss these days for those genres at thrift stores. But, you know, I would definitely recommend picking it up and giving it a go, especially if you do enjoy the cyberpunk setting. So, have you read Neuromancer? Let me know what you think of it in the comments below, and see you in the next video.